My name is Barb Sackel. Today's video is made possible by QuiltWoman.com. In this video today, I will be showing you how to do quilting in the ditch. But before we get to the actual stitching part of this, we have to prepare our quilt top. So you can see I have my quilt top on the ironing board. I have pressed it nicely, and remember I have said press, not iron, because if you iron hard, you will distort it. So remember to press gently. Now, I have taken my quilt top and laid it out on a piece of batting for measurement. So my batting is 2 to 3, maybe even 4 inches bigger than my quilt top all the way around. So first thing I'm going to do is look at my batting and see if I have any dark little strings or pieces of lint that will show through my lighter areas, and I'm going to pick them off and make sure that my batting is cleaned. Normally when you do a big quilt and it comes out of the package, you don't have to worry about this, but with the little stuff I do use scraps. So I've cleaned up my batting, and now I'm going to lay it on the ironing board. And I'm going to lay the quilt on top of it, centered. And I'm going to press my quilt gently into the batting. The batting is going to adhere to the back of the cotton. When you do use cotton fabric and batting, they have like little lips that kind of cling to each other, and it's kind of just makes your pinning a little bit easier coming on. Now, if you're wondering what kind of batting I use, I prefer to use Hobbs Heirloom batting. This is a 64 cotton polyester blend, and I think the drape is just beautiful for your quilts. So I tend to go mostly with this batting. Another thing that you have to consider when you pick out your batting is what is the distance that you can sew between. That means some battings will say you have 4 inches, and beyond that you have to sew within a 4 inches radius so that your quilt doesn't come apart later on. Some battings out there do give you up to 10 inches that you can sew between. Personally, I don't like the looks of quilting that far apart. I think the 4 inches, which is the most general number that you'll find, works quite nicely, and we capture that almost always across the board. So you'll see that I have just ironed or pressed my quilt top onto the batting. Now I'm going to take my batting, which I have previously prepared, which means I have laid my quilt top out on a piece of fabric, and I've cut extra large all the way around, and I have pressed it. So I'm going to turn this over, lay my backing right on top of my quilt top, right sides out, and I do want to peek just to make sure that it's large enough. And I believe I have totally captured it, so I'm going to lay my backing on it, and now I'm going to iron my backing onto my batting from the back side. Let me get the tippy top up here. When you pin based bigger quilts, you can't use this method for obvious reasons. It's just too big. Do you see how I'm going from the center and pushing my fabric out, and this is getting it nice and flat for me? Always just, you can see I'm just pushing that backing. It's clinging to the batting and forming a very nice sandwich for me. And there it is, the ripple again. And I'm going to continue pressing that ripple right out. There. Now I'm going to take this sandwich, and I'm barely going to touch it because it's adhered very nicely. I'm going to take it over to my cutting board, and I'm going to pin baste it. So I'll see you there. Okay, so I have taken my quilt sandwich and I've laid it out on my cutting board or a table or your kitchen table or even the floor if you need to. And when you pin based or even hand based, you always start in the center and you work your way out. And I will push my fabric as I work my way out to get that top and bottom as tight as I can. So I've dumped my pins just on my quilt top here. There's two kind of pins that different sizes, but there is a curved pin that you can use and there's a straight pin that you can use. And I'll put these so you can see them. They both work equally well. The curved pin is a little more expensive, but it is easier to clip together when you're done. So I'll leave that decision up to you. So again, I'm going to start in the middle of my quilt, and you can see how I keep pressing everything to the outside. And I'm going to start pinning, and because I'm on my mat, I can actually scrape my pin against it and not worry about scratching something underneath. If you are on your kitchen table, you have to be careful that you don't want to scratch it. So you'd want to put your mat down pretty much wherever you are. Now you'll notice the distance that I'm using. I usually use about a hand width. So you can pin more if you'd like to, but I wouldn't pin any less than this because it will generally let your fabric shift a little bit. So once I get my pinning going here, and you can see again, I'm starting from the center and working out, and this is true no matter what kind of quilt you pin based. You are going to start from the center and just continue to push out. Oh, did you notice something? Did you notice how I haven't closed any of my pins? Well, that's because after I'm all done, I'm going to come back with this little instrument that's called the quick clip, or by the way, you can use a grapefruit spoon. That'll do the same thing and just help you move along nicely and close all these pins in just a matter of seconds. So I'm going to continue to pin base this quilt top, and then we will be ready for quilting. I'll see you back in a minute. Okay, we're back. At this point, we have completed pin basting our quilt sandwich. We're getting ready to actually do some quilting on the machine. Now there's a couple things you have to do to prepare for the quilting on the machine. One, at this point you need a walking foot. If you don't have a walking foot, your quilting is probably going to be overlapping on itself in the back because your presser foot is going to push the material. But when you use the walking foot, your walking foot actually walks across the material and doesn't push it. So at this point, whenever you do quilting and straight line quilting, not free motion, but straight line quilting, you really want a walking foot. So put that on your machine. The next thing you have to figure out is what kind of thread do you want to use? Because if I used purple, it's going to show up on the white. If I used red, it's going to show up on the yellow. So really, the best of all the worlds is to go neutral, something that blends in with every color that you have. If you're a really adventurous kind of person, you can go into something called invisible thread. This is like, it's made of the material that a fishing line is made of, so you really don't see it. It's very thin. It is, however, a little tricky to work with. If you decide to go into using invisible thread, here's a couple tricks for you. One, buy the best quality you can find. The lesser quality is going to break and break and break because there is a stretch involved with going through the sewing machine. So buy the best quality you can find. The second thing is loosen your tension on your machine, because remember, as it goes through, it does tend to have a little bit of a stretch to it. Loosening your tension will help that go a little bit smoother. And if you start to break often, loosen your tension more. The third thing you can do is lessen your stitch per inch. So normally we stitch a kind of a tight 10 to 12 when we do our basic piecing. When you do your quilting, you can do a larger stitch length, and that'll help your thread as well. The third thing that might help the invisible thread is using a needle with a bigger eye. So you might want to go into a needle that's, I believe, a 90. that would help your quilting too. But for today's purposes, I'm going to use a neutral thread so that you can see it. Hopefully we'll have it hidden for most of the quilting, but you are going to see it a little bit. So let's set up and then I'll be right back with you. Threaded, I have my walking foot on. There's one more thing that you're going to need, and that is quilting gloves. Because as we quilt, we're going to push our quilt sandwich around different directions. And if you have a good grip on your quilt, it makes your life so much easier. So pick up a pair of quilting gloves, or there's even cots that you just put on the tips of your fingers, but anything to give you a grip. So now we've got everything in place, and we're going to prep our quilt to get ready to quilt it. Now what I mean by that is we're going to roll it up so that it fits through the neck of our machine. Remember when I said we're going to pin from the center out? Well, we're going to quilt from the center out. So the first thing we're going to quilt on this is the center sashing. And stitch in the ditch is just that. You stitch in between the two fabric pieces, and hopefully most of the time it won't show when I show you the trick. So because we're going to stitch this center piece here, if I just left this quilt out like this, as it comes through your machine neck, this is going to get all mushed up, and it's actually going to push you off track, and it's very hard to balance your quilt at that point. So what we're going to do is we're going to take and roll up each side of our quilt so that our quilt is now manageable. Now, this is just a little piece of quilt, but at the same time when I introduce this to the needle, you can see if it hangs down on my lap, if it gets caught on the edge of the table, again, it can push you, and so it'll go askew, and you don't want that. So what I do is I put this over my shoulder, and then that keeps it from getting caught on anything down here. And so as I feed it, it'll just come off my shoulder. This is especially important if you have a very large quilt that you're quilting. Try to put the weight up, and so it doesn't get caught anything, and your sides are rolled up so that it doesn't get caught again on the sides and put you off balance. So the more you can keep the weight and the sides balanced as you're going along, the straighter line you'll have. Okay, I'm going to put on my gloves and let's get ready to stitch. Okay, so here we are at the sewing machine, and everything is in place, and as you can see, I've lifted this so it doesn't get caught on the sewing machine. Now what you do at this point is you need to find any pins that are going to be in your way, because I'm going to take it right down this center seam along the center sashing. And this pin is causing me a little trouble, so I'm going to take that out right in the beginning. I'm going to put my needle on the outside of the fabric. My needle is going to come down right in the center between the yellow and the purple. Now I'm going to assist that needle going in the center because I'm going to stretch this a little bit. Normally what happens is when you stretch your material out and you stitch right in the center, as your material relaxes, it'll go loop and you'll lose your stitching, so it'll disappear for you. So you do want to give a little tension as you go along. So my feed dog is, or my foot, presser foot is down, and let's start. And we can, like I said, you can increase your stitch length. I'll do that a little bit, and let's go. Now I'm going to give that a little bit of tension. There is a marking on my walking foot, so I can keep that in the center. Keep the weight up off the table. Remember, it'll pull and catch on you. And so I'm going to get a little closer for viewing and take off. getting to a part where it's painfully obvious that one side is raised over the other, meaning the seam allowance is tucked under this so it's a little raised. When it's very obvious that one side is raised over the other, sew on the edge that is lower. Again, that'll help hide your thread. So this white, the background here is a little bit lower, so I'm sewing just on the margin area of the background. I got a pin here. See that that's going to be in my way. Get rid of that thing. There's no back stitching. You can see I just ran right off. Now while this is rolled up, because it is so close to where I need to go for my next one, I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to start right back on this. Same sashing going down the other side. Let's go. You want to be very careful. You never want to sew over these pins. That could be very bad for your machine. Always keep in tension. And there we have it. Okay, so now I have done stitch in the ditch across the center sashing pieces. And you can see that that locks in the center block perfectly. So now we have to plan our attack for how to quilt the rest of this quilt. Remember when I said that I used Hobbs Heirloom, that I have up to 4 inches. That means I can't quilt farther apart than 4 inches or the batting could ravel upon washing. So you can see in the split rail fence, this is a 6-inch area. So when I quilt the split rail fence, I first of all know that the obvious is to do the center. But because I have that 4-inch restriction, I will have to do at least 1 more in each block. Now you can do all of them if you'd like, or you don't have to. Remember, this comes up to personal preference, except for that you have to go within the boundaries of what the batting tells you. So for this particular block, I would do the center pieces and then I would go between the yellow and green on each one and then play it by ear to see if I wanted to go any further than that. For the flower block, you don't always have to go in your seams. So on the flower block, I could do the flower petals. I could do each leaf, and then I could do the flower pot. Now this area right here again is bigger than 4 inches, so I would probably have to baste a couple quilt lines right down these to hold that in, because again the batting always dictates how big you go. On the courthouse steps, you can do just each square that gets bigger and bigger. I would feel comfortable with that. And on the churn dash, you can go just these 4 lines. Again, it would be up to your discretion whether you wanted to go and do, these individual, because this does fit the 4-inch distance and you're comfortable not quilting that area if you don't want to. But let me tell you, the more quilting you do on a quilt, the better it looks. So if you have the patience and the time, and I would go ahead and quilt as much as you can. Now the rule of thumb with quilting is try to be consistent throughout your entire quilt. In other words, don't do one block an inch apart, and then another block leave up to 5 inches, 4 inches gap. So be consistent, whatever your choice is. After your block work is done, then come out and do your last stitch on your outside sashing piece, and this will complete the quilting on your quilt, and you are ready to go ahead and put your binding on. Thank you again for joining me. Be sure to check out more of my video series, and we'll see you again next time.